Hey, what's up guys? Sana okay kayo. Nasa gym ako ngayon. Maaga pa. Siguro mga 5 a.m. Pero may papakita ko na bihirang mangyayari. Si Ben Woodman. Nasa treadmill. Ben!
Ano?
Ben, mag-hi ka sa lahat!
Ayoko! I-off mo yung camera!
Okay ka lang, buddy?
I-off mo yan!
Ipapost ko ito. Prev, uy! Bumalik ka dito. Ang lupit!
Shall I get personal with this?
I was in an x-ray clinic and then I accidentally opened the dressing room curtain when someone was in there changing, and you know, like you're butt naked, you have to wear the robe, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, and then I just like closed it and like ran out.
Okay, so I was at camp when I was like 13, and I'm not a great swimmer, and halfway back I realized, what am I doing? I can't swim. And I went from like this to like this, and then I started sinking, and the hot lifeguard had to like take his shirt off and like dive in and save me, and all the kids were there and they all left.
When I broke my nose playing rugby, I hit my own teammate, so...
But one time I was on a date, it was like this really fancy restaurant, the guy was super nice, we like got dessert, and it was so beautiful and great, and then he was talking to me and he said something really funny, and I like spewed food onto him.
I think the most embarrassing thing I can think about is me asking her out and she said no. So
It was the most awkward ride home.
Nagkakasama na tayo ng ilang linggo ngayon, pero iniisip ko lang, meron ka na bang sinabihan na dumadalo ka sa Alpha? Tulad sa iyong paaralan o trabaho or sports team, ay pwedeng medyo nakakailang kung sasabihin sa iyong mga kaibigan.
Uy, Kal!
Oh, uy Bill!
Meron ka bang plano sa darating na Miyerkules ng gabi?
Miyerkules, sabi mo? Oo, kasama ko ilan sa mga kaibigan ko. Kakain kami at pagkatapos, may video at pagkatapos kami ay nag-uusap kami at kahit na kumpiyansa ka sa kung ano ang iyong pinaniniwalaan, pwede pa rin makaramdam ng medyo awkward na pag-usapan ang tungkol dito sa ibang tao, at iyan ay magkakaroon ng mga tanong tulad ng dapat ko bang sabihin sa iba ang tungkol kay Jesus? At tama lang ba na pag-usapan ang mga ganitong bagay? At kung oo, paano ko ito uumpisahan? Pagsasabi sa iba, bakit at paano ko sasabihin sa iba? Iniisip ng ilang tao na ang pananampalataya ay dapat pribado, na mainam na paniwalaan ito para sa iyong sarili. Ngunit hindi mo dapat ipilit ito sa iba o kahit na pag-usapan ito.
Oo. Pero yan ay magandang paksa. Dahil lahat ng naging isang Kristiyano ay narinig ang tungkol kay Jesus mula sa isang tao. Kaya bakit sasabihin ng ibang taong tungkol kay Jesus?
Una, ito ay dahil sinabi ni Jesus sa atin. Laging sinasabi ni Jesus sa mga tao, humayo at sabihin, humayo at mag-imbita. Ako ay pumarito upang kayo ay magkaroon ng buhay. Humayo kayo at gumawa ng mga alagad.
Ang isa pang dahilan ay ang mensahe ni Jesus ay nakakatugon sa isang tunay na pangangailangan ng puso ng tao. Kunwari, ikaw ay na-stranded sa isang disyerto kasama na iyong kaibigan at gumagala ka at may nakita kang tubig at prutas. Ang unang bagay na gagawin mo ay tatakbo pabalik sa iyong kaibigan at sasabihin sa kanya na nakahanap ka ng pagkain at tubig.
Mayroong spiritual na pagkagutom at pagkauhaw sa bawat puso ng tao. At sa isang banda, ito ay tulad ng mga tao na naglalakad sa disyerto. Naghahanap upang mapunan ang pagkagutom. Kaya ang importanteng bagay na magagawa natin ay sabihin sa mga tao ang kamanghamanghang balita tungkol kay Jesus. Siya ang ganap na tutupad sa ating spiritual na pagkagutom.
Ang kaugnayan kay Jesus ay nagdudulot ng kapayapaan at kagalakan. Nagdudulot ito ng kahulugan at layunin sa ating buhay. Pinupuno ng Diyos ang ating mga puso ng pagmamahal, pinapatawad niya tayo at nag-aalok siya sa atin ng buhay ng walang hanggan. At yan ay mabuting balita na nagawa natin ibahagi sa mga tao. At ang pagsasabi sa mga tao ng mabuting balita ang pinakamainam. Palaging nagbabahagi ang mga tao ng mga kahangahangang bagay gaya ng video ni Ben na ibinahagi ko na mayroon ng 20,000 views. Ginagawa namin ito parati sa larong uri ng mga bagay.
Video?
Bro, mobile phone, ito ang future. Hindi na ito magiging mas malit pa kaysa dito. Tingnan mo, halos hindi mo ito makikita sa bulsa ko. Kailangan mong bumili ng isa, dude. Sinasabi ko sa'yo, ito ang future. Bakit ka maglalakad kung pwede ka namang mag-have? Nasabi ko sa'yo, Kal, kailangan mo subukan ng Netflix. Walang nangyaring mas positibong epekto sa buhay ko kaysa Netflix.
Wow! Saan ako mag-sign up?
Sa internet.
Nang magsimula ako sa pagsunod kay Jesus, masyado akong mapusok na sabihin sa ibang tao ang tungkol dito. Naalala ko ito isang beses nang sinubukan kong sabihin sa kaibigan kong si Chanel at talagang mapilit at manhid ako at hindi ako napabuti. Pagkatapos ng ilang beses tanggihan, nawala ang aking katapangan at napalitan ito ng takot.
Nahihirapan ako sa takot minsan. Tulad ng natandaan kong isang beses na ako'y nasa paralan. Nakaupo ako kasama ng ilang kaibigan at may nagtanong sa akin, pwede mo bang sabihin sa akin bakit ka isang Kristiyano? Ito ang aking pagkakataon na may nagtanong sa akin. Ngunit natakot ako na makasabi ng mali kaya natigilan ako.
At sa palagay ko, yan ang maaaring mangyari sa maraming tao. Mula sa pagiging kawalan ng damdamin, nagiging takot.
Pero hindi ito dapat maging ganoon.
Kaya paano natin maibabahagi ang ating pananampalataya?
Gusto natin tignan ang iba't ibang paraan na sabihin natin sa ibang tungkol kay Jesus.
Una, sinasabi natin sa iba sa pamamagitan ng ating mga kilos. Ang pagmamahal na ipinapakita natin sa mga praktikal na paraan ay pwedeng makita ng mga tao ang pagmamahal ni Jesus. Sabi ni Jesus, kayo ang asin sa lupa, kayo ang liwanag ng mundo. Pasikatin ninyo ang liwanag sa harap ng iba upang nakita nila ang inyong mabubuting gawa at magbigay ng kaluwalhatian sa inyong Ama na nasa langit.
I was a crack addict in jail, in a lot of trouble, in a prison cell. And while I was there, a Salvation Army lady came to my jail cell just to kind of visit me. And I remember when I saw her coming, I was like, oh, great, here comes the church and here comes a lecture and I should know better and what am I doing with my life and all those sort of things. And she didn't say any of that thing. She just came in, wrapped her arms around me. She said, I love you. I mean, it was awkward because I was not wrapping my arms around her. Like, I was like hard-hearted. I was just like ticked off and I was high. And when she left, I remember the door closing, the clang of the prison door. And then God showed up in my cell. He did the same thing. He wrapped his arms around me and he whispered in my ear, I love you. And it was genuinely the first time I realized that God was for me and not against me. And that he wasn't mad or angry or distant or disappointed, and there is something something happened and I can't even really describe it, except the best way that I can describe it is that somebody turned on a light. What I didn't know, which would change my life forever, was that God could use me to save someone else. When I connected those two things, just everything changed, because then I realized that this faith that I'm living is not just about me. I've been part of the Salvation Army for 22 years, and the founder of the Salvation Army is William and Catherine Booth, and part of his gospel message to the whole church, I think, was that Christianity is practical. So he used to say, you really can't preach to a man with an empty stomach. Because good news, this good news of the gospel actually should be tangible. So I usually say to people who are beginning, what's in front of you to do? What are you passionate about? Who's around you? Do you even know? Sometimes the first step is just to find out. I know a 14-year-old kid who sat next at lunch to a kid whose family was filing for bankruptcy. And he was really, he didn't know that at the time, but he wasn't eating lunch. And so the 14-year-old kid just felt like he would share his lunch with him and just gave him his lunch every day. And, he'd come home from school just starving, and his mom's like, you're just nonstop eating. But what he was really doing was giving his lunch away every day to this kid, not asking any questions, not just shoving it across the thing and then having a conversation about the day. And eventually this kid confided in the 14-year-old and said, actually, this has been the hardest season of my life. And I've been thinking about taking my life. This has just been, and every day you show me that someone's looking out for me and someone cares about me. And so all that transpired with an awkward 14 boy at high school. Awkward. It's not a super cool kid, but just shoving his tray towards somebody who is alone. And he was able to pray with him and tell him more about how God loved him and would never leave him. Because if you can understand who you are, then you can, then that's the gospel, isn't it? This is the Jesus showing up in dark places saying, no, God hasn't forgotten you. It's not too late. You matter to the world because I designed you, I made you, I love you, I can free you. What do you need? That's the essence of the gospel, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, preach. Everyone should preach about their faith. I think every religion should spread awareness and,
Oh yeah, I mean, like, if the other person is okay with it.
Yeah, I think that's totally okay. I think it matters how you do it. I think it's not so great when you try and force your beliefs or your religion or your faith onto others.
It's almost like Yelp, like people go on Yelp and share their experience. So I feel like you can do the same thing with religion. And I check Yelp.
you should be able to talk about whatever you want to talk about with your peers and your friends. If you're good friends, then why not? Or to anyone.
Everybody has their own story, and I think everybody should share it.
If, for example, I was a gymnast and I told you that I'm a gymnast, same way you could tell me you're a Christian. If I'm interested, I'm going to ask you myself.
I mean, I feel like the best witness that people have made to me is how they're living their life and the relationship that they have with God and their family. And I think that life speaks for itself.
Hey, ano? Ano ito?
Ito lang ay, alam mo na kung ano. Huwag ka na mag-alala tungkol dito. Ang ikalawang paraan ng pagsasabi natin sa iba ay may pagbibigay ng magandang dahilan upang maniwala kay Jesus. Kapag si Apostol Pablo ang nagturo tungkol kay Jesus, sinasabi sa banal na kasulatan na siya ay nangangatwiran sa mga tao. Ipinaliwanag niya ang mensahe at gumawa siya ng sitwasyon para sa pananampalataya at ni Kristo. Sinabi sa unang Pedro, laging maging handa sa pagsagot sa bawat tao na humihingi sa inyo ng katwiran tungkol sa pag-asang nasa inyo. Ngunit gawin mo ito ng mahinahon at paggalang. Isa sa mga pinakamahusay na paraan upang maipakita natin ang kahinahunan at paggalang ay pakikinig sa mga tao. May mga taong hindi talaga handang makinig hanggang sila muna ay pakinggan. At napakahalaga na habang nakikinig tayo na totoong gusto nating malaman kung anong nasa isip ng mga tao. Ito ay tanda ng paggalang. Narinig ko sinabi na hindi mahalaga sa tao kung gaano ang alam mo hanggang sa malaman nila kung gaano ka magmalasakit.
At lagi kong sinasabi na ang tao ay walang pakialam kung ano ang alam mo hanggat sa ikay magmalasakit. Masabi mo pa rin sa kanila kung ano ang alam mo habang ipinapakita mo sa kanila kung gaano ka nagmamalasakit. Kaya kapag nalaman nila kung gaano ka nagmamalasakit, mas magiging mahalaga sa kanila kung ano ang alam mo. Dahil ang pinaka-importanting bagay na dapat nilang malaman na kayo ay nagmamalasakit.
Yan ay kahanga-hanga. Dapat mong ilagay yan sa bumper sticker.
Ben thought this was a fantastic idea, but he soon realized the bumper sticker market was a bit more stop and go than he expected. And it didn't help that the competition was great at proclaiming their message.
Ang ikatlong paraan ng pagsasabi natin sa iba ay sa pagpapahayag ng mabuting balita. Sabi sa Ebanghelyo ni Mateo, nagpunta si Jesus sa lahat ng mga bayan at nagtuturo at nagpapahayag ng mabuting balita ng kaharian.
Ang salitang ebanghelyo ay literal na nangangahulugang mabuting balita. Ito ay isang pahayag tungkol sa kung sino si Jesus at kung anong ginawa niya. Ito ang anunsyo ng mahal kayo ng Diyos. Mapapatawad kayo at magkakaroon kayo ng relasyon sa Kanya.
Ito ang pinakamabuting balita na maririnig ng sino man. Kadalasan, isang paraan na maririnig ng mga tao ang ebanghelyo ay sa personal na imbitasyon.
Oo, iyan ay ginawa ni Jesus. Sabi niya sa mga tao, kung interesado kayo, magsiparito kayo at inyong makikita. At nang sumunod sila sa Kanya, ang mga tao ring iyon, sinabi sa kanilang mga kaibigan, kailangan niyong pumunta at makikita at maaari niya ang dahilan kung bakit pumupunta ka sa Alpha. Marahil isa sa iyong mga kaibigan ang nag-imbita sa iyo na pumunta at makita. Pumunta at alamin ang mga bagay na ito para sa iyong sarili.
Ito ang nakikita natin sa simula ng Ebanghelyo ni Juan. Si Andrew, isa sa mga disipulo, ay inimbitahan ni Jesus na pumunta at makita. Pagkatapos, ang unang ginawa niya ay umalis at hanapin ang kanyang kapatid na si Peter at imbitahin siya na makilala si Jesus.
At ito ang maganda. Si Peter ay naging isa sa mga pinakamaimpluwensyang tao sa kasaysayan ng mundo. Siya ang pinuno ng sinaunang simbahan at kailangan mo lamang pumunta sa Rome sa St. Peter's Square para makita ang mga palatandaan ng kanyang epekto.
Hindi lahat magagawa natin kung ano ang ginawa ni Peter. Pero pwede natin gawin ang ginawa ni Andrew. Mag-imbita ng mga tao at pumunta at makita para makilala si Jesus para sa kanilang sarili.
My family was always super protective. So when I moved to Vancouver, I was introduced to, and studying university, I was introduced to alcohol and cigarettes and parties and clubbing. I love people and I love having friends, and they noticed this. And so what they did was they asked me if they just pretty much hired me to bring people into the clubs. And then I'll bring, I don't know, anywhere between 20 to 100 people on the weekends. But I was super passionate about it because that was life for me. I love the club. I love feeling like I was part of a community. My dad actually started going through really, really bad depression. He went through several times where he wanted to actually commit suicide. Somebody that knew him said, "Hey Jorge, I know that you're going through all of this, and I don't know if this will be of help at all, but there's this thing called the Alpha Course, and why don't you just give it a try?" And my dad had never been to church before, but somehow he actually took that invitation and said yes. He gave his life to Christ. I remember this moment like it was yesterday. He sat at our table and he said, "Listen, you guys, I just want to talk to you. I have received forgiveness from God, and I would actually love to ask for forgiveness from you." And he asked my mom for forgiveness, and he moved back to our home that day. And he was completely transformed. He was a different person, full of light. My dad actually said, "Dory, I really want you to try going to church." And actually, it was one Monday night. I was invited to the Alpha Course, and I was in the back because I was very skeptical. And for the first time, I was like, "Oh, I wonder what it would be like if I lifted my hands to God and said I love you for the first time." And so I was like, "Well, nobody's looking, so I can do it." And I lifted my hands to God and I said, "God, I love you. I need you." And right away, I just felt the love of God go from my head to my toes, all over. And I just felt that I was loved for the first time in my life. The week after I encountered God, I was like, why didn't anybody tell me about this? And why am I not telling other people about this? I have to. So I remember I went into my office and I started inviting everybody. I was like, you have to come to church. And my brother's younger than me, so I said, "Jorge, you just need to try it. You need to come." And he came and he was touched by God and he was completely transformed by the love of God. And then later, that same year, my mom came and she was also completely transformed by God. And then after that, my parents went to Miami to see my grandparents, and there they took my grandparents to a church and they gave them their life to Christ, and all because of one invitation. So that's where I find my courage, just in thinking, because somebody invited my dad to a relationship with God, I am now completely transformed. So why wouldn't I invite somebody else?
Sa John 9, may kwento tungkol sa isang bulag na lalaki na nakatagpo ni Jesus at tuluyang gumaling. Ang mga tao ay namangha at maraming itinanong sa kanya, "Sino ang nagpagaling sa'yo? Nasaan siya ngayon? Paano niya ginawa ito? Paano namin siya makikita?" Ngunit wala siyang sagot sa lahat. Sinabi lamang niya sa kanila kung ano ang nagawa ni Jesus sa kanyang buhay. Sinabi niya, "Ang alam ko lang na dati akong bulag at ngayon ay nakakita ako." Ito ay pareho para sa inyo at sa akin. Hindi nyo kailangan magkaroon ng bawat sagot sa bawat tanong para ibahagi sa inyong personal na kwento kung paano si Jesus ay nakaapekto sa inyong buhay.
At habang ang inyong mga kaibigan ay nakikita ang pagkakaiba na ginawa ni Jesus sa inyong buhay, Inihahanda nito na magkaroon ka ng pag-uusap tungkol sa Ebanghelyo at makita ng ating mga kaibigan na nakaranas ng pagmamahal ng Diyos ay isa sa pinaka-kapanapanabik na bagay. Ang ika-4 at ika-5 bahagi ng Pagsasabi sa Iba ay ang kapangyarihan ng banal na Espiritu at ang pagdarasal. Sa Thessalonians ay sinulat ni Pablo na ang aming Ebanghelyo ay dumating sa inyo hindi lamang sa mga salita kundi pati na rin sa kapangyarihan ng banal na Espiritu at may malalim na paniniwala.
Kaya ang pagsasabi sa iba ay hindi lamang tungkol sa mga salita o intelektual na argumento. Ito ay tungkol sa isang karanasan ng banal na Espiritu, isang karanasan ng pag-ibig ng Diyos na ibinubuhos sa atin mga puso.
Oo, at sa huli, ito ay Diyos na nagbabago ng buhay at iyon ang dahilan kung bakit ang pagdarasal ay isang mahalagang bahagi na sinasabi ng iba. Ang kaibigan kong si Tara ay nagbibigay inspirasyon sa akin sa paraan na siya ay nagdarasal. Para sa kanyang mga kaibigan, meron siyang piraso ng papel na itinatago niya na nakatiklop sa kanyang bulsa at naalala kong nakita ko siya binubuksan ito ng ilang beses at ito ay puno ng mga pangalan. Ito ang mga pangalan ng lahat ng kanyang mga kaibigan ay pinagdarasal niya para mahanap nila ang kumpletong buhay kay Jesus. At nang makita ko ito, nagpasya akong simulang magdasal para sa mga kaibigan ko rin. Nasa high school ako noon kaya ginamit ko ang yearbook ko na gabay. At bago matulog sa gabi o sa umaga bago pumasok sa paralan, magdarasal ako. Para sa ilang mga hanay ng mga muka, tumitingin sa bawat larawan at iniisip ko ang tungkol sa aking kaibigan na si Jared. Si Jared at ako ay nasa school tennis team at palagi kaming natatapos sa pag-uusap tungkol sa pananampalataya at Diyos. At kaya nagsimula akong magdasal para sa kanya araw-araw rin. At natatandaan ko pagkalipas ng ilang buwan, pumasok siya sa paaralan isang araw at may isang bagay na lubos na nagbago sa kanyang puso. Nang araw na iyon, ang isa sa pinakamatalik kong kaibigang si Jared ay nag-umpisang sumunod kay Jesus at ang kanyang buhay ay hindi kailanman naging pareho mula noon.
Kaya napaka-importante para sa atin na magdasal para sa iba. Ngunit dapat din tayong magdasal para sa ating sarili. Ang mga unang Kristiyano ay nagdasal ng katapangan laban sa oposisyon. Maaring hindi mo harapin ng pisikal na oposisyon tulad ng naginawa nila at tulad ng ginagawa ng maraming Kristiyano sa buong mundo ngayon. Ngunit maaari mong harapin ang oposisyon sa iba pang mga paraan. Ang mga tao ay maaaring insultuhin ka o pagtawanan ka. Pwede kang magdasal ng lakas ng loob at pagmamahal at kapangyarihan na kailangan mo para magpatuloy na sabihin sa iba ang mabuting salita.
They should have a positive impact on how they helped people that were less fortunate than they are.
Love and grace and compassion.
Giving back to society, I think Christians are doing too much preaching right now.
We should be loving, we should be kind, we should be approachable.
Love.
I think it should be to spread more love.
Christians should be known for their forgiveness. They're very forgiving. They're very caring.
The Bible says to love thy neighbor. A lot of Christians don't do that exactly. If Christianity could start focusing more on the idea of it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, you're still my neighbor.
I mean, they want to be known for following Christ, right?
Well, follow Christ.
It's safe to say that when Ben's dad, Bob, was a teenager in the 1960s, he was not a follower of Jesus, and attending church was the furthest thing from his mind. One day, after having smoked a lot of marijuana together, Bob and his friend Crazy Dave decided to hitchhike out of town and see where the road took them. Within minutes, they got lucky and were picked up by two other young guys also heading out on an adventure. They were all smiles. But Bob and Crazy Dave weren't prepared for what came next. After a few minutes, the guy driving began to talk to them about God, explaining to them how God created all things perfectly, but how then it all got broken. Then his buddy joined in, telling Bob and Dave how God sent his only son, Jesus, on the greatest rescue mission ever to save people from the brokenness. The four of them talked for 2 hours, until they came to a crossroads and it was time for the travellers to part ways. When Bob and Dave got out of the car, Dave burst out laughing. What on earth were they talking about? And they call me crazy. But Bob just smiled, because he thought it was quite simply the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Not long after, Bob came to another crossroads, this time in his heart. He decided he wanted to follow Jesus, and that day he began a relationship with God. To this day, he remembers those two kind strangers and how they drove away, never knowing if their words had any effect, never knowing the difference they had made in his life and in the generations to come after him.
Sa tuwing sasabihin mo sa mga tao ang tungkol kay Jesus, may malaking epekto ito. Kaya huwag sumuko dahil ang ebanghelyo ay ang kapangyarihan ng Diyos.
Kaya maaari mong gawin ang hakbang na iyon at simulan ng sabihin sa iba, kung gagawin mo, ikaw ay haharap sa mga hamon. Pero makakaranas ka rin ng kagalakan na makitang iba na matuklasan ang pananampalataya kay Jesus.
Wala akong maisip na anumang bagay na makakagawa ng malaking kaibahan sa buhay ng isang tao kaysa makatagpo si Yesu Kristo. Okay, are you rolling? Okay, tatakutin natin si Jason sa spider na to. Halika, papabalikin natin siya. Panoorin nyo. Guys, ito ay isang set ng pelikula. Kailangan kayo ay... Spider!
Nakuha niyo ba yun?